You did everything right. You listened, supported, never raised your voice. You remembered her favorite coffee order, texted good morning every day, and made yourself available whenever she needed you. And yet, something in her gaze shifted. She doesn't look at you the same way anymore. The conversations became shorter. The warmth in her voice grew distant, and late at night, staring at the ceiling, you're left wondering, how did being a good man make you invisible? Here's the truth that no one wants to tell you. She didn't leave because you were too bad. She left because you lost yourself trying to keep her. The paradox that haunts modern relationships is this. She respects the man who could walk away. Not because he wants to, but because he never abandoned himself to stay. Carl Jung understood something about human nature that we've forgotten. A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. Today, we're going into that inferno. Because the man she can't forget isn't the one who clung the tightest. It's the one who held himself together when everything fell apart. Let me paint you a picture you'll recognize. There was a time when you entered a room and she noticed. When your opinions mattered, when you had plans, boundaries, a life that existed beyond her approval. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. You went from being proactive to reactive, from having courage to just being right, from being the man she pursued to the one always having to compromise. It happened so gradually, you didn't even notice. Every yes when you meant no. Every plan you canceled to fit her schedule. Every principle you bent to avoid conflict. Each time, you told yourself it was love. But deep down, something was dying. Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we sacrifice to maintain peace. He said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, but instead of accepting yourself, you began editing yourself, deleting the edges that made you interesting, smoothing out the roughness that made you real. There's an archetype Jung never directly named, but I see it everywhere. The Appeaser, the man who trades his inner depth for temporary emotional stability. He's not cruel or weak in obvious ways, he's just forgettable. He becomes wallpaper in his own life. The Appeaser believes that love means making yourself smaller so she can feel bigger. But here's what Jung knew about the feminine psyche. It doesn't respect what it can completely control. It's drawn to what it cannot fully possess. She doesn't need you to bend. She needs you to stand. Let me tell you about David, a story that might sound familiar because it's happening to men everywhere. David was a successful architect, 34 years old, with a kind heart and everything a woman should want on paper: six-figure income, own apartment, good relationship with his family, emotionally available, the whole package. He met Sarah at a coffee shop, and their connection was immediate. She was brilliant, ambitious, beautiful, in that effortless way that made him feel lucky just to be in her presence. For the first few months, everything was electric. She seemed fascinated by his work, impressed by his dedication, drawn to his quiet confidence. But then the testing began, and David, like most men, didn't even realize he was being tested. It started small. Sarah would suggest they skip his weekly basketball game with his college friends to spend time together. "We barely see each other during the week," she'd say, and David, wanting to be a good boyfriend, would cancel. When she criticized his friends as immature and stuck in the past, he gradually saw them less and less. When she didn't like the music he played in his car, he changed it to her preferences. When she made subtle comments about his clothes being too casual, he upgraded his wardrobe to match her taste. When she was in a bad mood, he would completely change his energy to accommodate hers, walking on eggshells, speaking softly, avoiding any topic that might upset her further. David thought he was being loving, considerate, the kind of partner any woman would want. Sarah felt like she was dating a shapeshifter, a man with no core identity of his own. Here's the psychological truth that no one teaches men, the truth that could save countless relationships if we understood it. Women don't test you with their words. They test you by watching whether you keep your boundaries. Every time you say yes when you mean no, she notices. Not consciously, perhaps, but somewhere deep in her instinct, in that ancient part of her brain that's been calibrated over millions of years of evolution to select strong mates, a little voice whispers, "He's not solid. He bends too easily. He's not safe to surrender to. This isn't cruelty. This isn't manipulation. This is biology." The feminine psyche is hardwired to test for strength, consistency, reliability. She needs to know that you won't collapse under pressure, because if you can't handle her testing, how can you handle the real challenges life will throw at both of you? Jung spoke extensively about the anima, the feminine aspect within every man's psyche. The anima is meant to be a bridge to understanding the feminine, not a replacement for masculine identity. But when your anima becomes your entire personality, when you lose your masculine core, trying to merge completely with her emotions, you become formless, and formless men are invisible to the feminine eye. The feminine doesn't want another feminine energy. It wants to dance with the masculine. It wants polarity, tension, the beautiful friction that occurs when two complete whole people come together without losing themselves in the process. After 2 years, Sarah broke up with David. She told him he was too nice, that she felt like she was dating her best friend rather than a man she could respect. David was devastated, confused, and angry. He had done everything right, hadn't he? Think of the last 5 times you said, "I don't mind," or "whatever you want," when you actually had a strong preference. What were you afraid would happen if you had simply stated what you wanted? What story were you telling yourself about what makes a man good? Love doesn't need submission, it needs spine. The difference between a lovable man and a respectable man is this. A lovable man makes her feel good about herself at the moment. A respectable man makes her feel safe in the world long term. Let me tell you about Marcus, a man who understood something David didn't. Marcus was dating a woman named Elena, passionate, intelligent, but prone to emotional storms. When Elena would have one of her episodes, usually triggered by work stress or family drama, most men in Marcus's position would do one of 2 things. Either try to fix the problem immediately or absorb her emotions and become upset with themselves. Marcus did neither. When Elena would come home in a rage about her boss, when she would start crying about her mother's criticism, when she would spiral into anxiety about her future, Marcus would remain calm, present, but unmoved by the emotional chaos swirling around him. He wouldn't rush to offer solutions she hadn't asked for. He wouldn't absorb her emotions and mirror them back to her. He would simply say, "I can see you're really upset about this. I'm here when you're ready to talk about it constructively." And then he would continue with his evening, reading his book, preparing dinner, working on his side project. At first, Elena hated this response. She was used to men scrambling to manage her emotions, to fix her problems, to make her feelings their primary concern. She would sometimes escalate, trying to pull him into her storm. But Marcus held his ground, not coldly, not without compassion, but with the kind of steady presence that said, "I care about you, but I'm not going to lose myself in your chaos." Gradually, something remarkable happened. Elena began to feel a safety she'd never experienced before, the safety of being with a man who wouldn't lose himself in her storms. She began to trust that he wouldn't be swept away by her emotions, which paradoxically made her feel more secure being emotional around him. More importantly, she began to manage her emotions better. When someone isn't enabling your emotional dysregulation, when they're not rewarding it with frantic attention, you're forced to develop better coping mechanisms. Jung wrote, "Where love rules, there is no will to power. Where power predominates, their love is lacking." But he wasn't talking about power over others. He was talking about power over yourself. The power to remain centered in the storm. The power to love someone without losing your boundaries. The power to be present without being consumed. Most men think that love means absorption, becoming one with her emotions, her needs, her world. They think that caring means having no life outside of the relationship. No thoughts she doesn't share, no boundaries she can't cross. But healthy love requires what psychologists call differentiation, the ability to remain yourself while being in an intimate relationship with another. It requires two whole people choosing each other, not two halves, trying to become complete through merger. The man who can remain himself while loving someone else creates what Jung called the transcendent function, a third space where two individuated people can come together without losing their essential nature. This is where real intimacy lives, not in codependency, but in the conscious choice of two sovereign beings. For the next week, when someone you care about is having strong emotions, practice this. Acknowledge their feelings. I can see you're really frustrated. Offer support without taking responsibility for their emotional state. I'm here if you want to talk. And then maintain your own energy and plans unless they specifically ask for your help and you choose to give it. If this is hitting home, if you're recognizing patterns you've been blind to, take a moment to pause this video and really think about your own relationships. We're about to go deeper into the psychology of attraction, and I want you to be present for what's coming next. Here's the moment of truth that cuts through everything you've been taught about relationships, everything you've believed about what makes a man attractive, everything you've tried to be. You tried to be everything she wanted, and in doing so, became invisible. You became the man who never disagreed, never challenged, never had rough edges for her to push against. You became smooth, predictable, safe in all the wrong ways. You became what Jung would call the man without a shadow. So, focused on being good, that you lost all complexity, all mystery, all depth, and she looked at you one day and realized, there's nothing here to discover, no challenge to overcome, no fire to warm herself by, no strength to surrender to, just endless accommodation wrapped in the clothes of a man. Jung said, the greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents. Don't let your love tragedy be the unlived life of your authentic self. Don't let your epitaph read, he was very agreeable. Let me be direct about what the man who can walk away really means, because this concept has been twisted and misunderstood by men who think it's about playing games or being cruel. It's not a heartless person who abandons others easily. It's not a player who never commits. It's not a man who withholds love as a manipulation tactic. It's a man who doesn't compromise his core identity to be kept. It's a man who understands that his worth isn't determined by someone else's decision to stay or go. It's a man who has built his life on such solid foundations that another person's presence is a gift, not a necessity for his survival. It's the man who can say, I love you deeply, but I won't lose myself to keep you. It's the man who can say, I want this relationship to work, but not at the price of my authenticity. It's the man who can say, "I'm committed to you, but I'm also committed to remaining myself." This terrifies most men because we've been taught that love means need, that devotion means dependency, that caring means being unable to survive without the other person. We've been taught that a man who could walk away doesn't really love, when the truth is exactly the opposite. Jung understood something deeper about human psychology that modern culture has forgotten. We're only truly drawn to what we cannot completely control. We're only deeply attracted to what maintains its own center of gravity. Think about the men you know that women can't forget, the ones who become the standard against which all other men are measured. They're not the ones who worshipped at the altar of feminine approval. They're not the ones who made their entire identity about being the perfect boyfriend. They're the ones who had something else, a mission, a vision, a life that existed independently of romantic validation. They're the men who could be fully present in love without being desperate for it, who could commit completely without losing themselves in the commitment. The woman in your life is not testing you to be cruel. She's not withholding affection to manipulate you. She's testing you because her biological programming, refined over millions of years of evolution, is constantly scanning for one crucial piece of information. Is this man solid enough for me to surrender to? Is he strong enough that I can stop being strong for a moment? When you bend at the first sign of her displeasure, when you scramble to fix her moods like they're emergencies, when you abandon your plans to accommodate her whims, when you edit your thoughts to match her preferences, you're sending a clear, unmistakable signal. I am not a rock. I am not in the shelter. I am just another thing for you to manage. And here's the cruel irony. The more you try to prove your love through self-abandonment, the less lovable you become. The more you sacrifice yourself to keep her, the less she wants to be kept by you. Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject or repress. For most modern men, the shadow includes their capacity to say no, to disappoint others, to put their own needs first sometimes, to be willing to lose someone rather than lose themselves. But the shadow, when integrated properly, doesn't make you cruel. It makes you complete. It gives you the depth and complexity that the feminine psyche finds irresistible. Write down 5 things you've stopped doing, stopped being, or stopped believing since you've been in relationships. These might be hobbies you abandoned, friends you stopped seeing, opinions you stopped expressing, or dreams you put on hold. Look at this list and ask yourself, what would happen if I reclaimed these parts of myself? The fear, of course, is that she'll leave. But here's what you need to understand. If she leaves because you become more yourself, she was never right for you anyway. And if she stays because you've become more yourself, then you've found something real. Inner freedom begins with a radical realization that will change everything about how you approach relationships. You don't need anyone to validate your worth, not even the person you love most in the world. This isn't about becoming cold or detached. This isn't about not caring or building walls around your heart. This is about what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, independent of others' expectations, approval, or presence in your life. Picture this image in your mind. A man walking away from a situation that no longer serves him. Maybe it's a job that's killing his soul. Maybe it's a friendship that's become toxic. Maybe it's a relationship that requires him to be someone he's not. He's not angry. There's no rage in his posture, no desire for revenge in his eyes. He's not trying to punish anyone or make a dramatic statement. His face is calm, his steps are steady, and there's something in his entire being that communicates. I know who I am, with or without this. I know my worth, regardless of whether others see it. That image, the man walking away with quiet dignity, strikes something primal in the feminine psyche. Not because women want to be abandoned, but because they recognize authentic strength when they see it. They recognize a man who has not lost himself to love, who has not traded his center for someone else's approval. She'll only respect the man who can walk away because that's the man who doesn't walk away from himself. That's the man who has integrated what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites in tension without being torn apart by them. Love and independence, commitment and autonomy, care and boundaries. Let me tell you about James, a man who discovered this truth the hard way. After his divorce at 38, James was devastated. He had given everything to his marriage, his time, his energy, his friends, his hobbies, his dreams. When it ended, he realized he had no idea who he was outside of being a husband. For 2 years, James did something most men are terrified to do. He stayed single. Not because he was bitter or afraid of commitment, but because he knew he needed to rebuild himself from the ground up. He started the business he'd always dreamed of. He took up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and discovered he loved the physical and mental challenge. He learned to play guitar, something he'd wanted to do since he was a teenager. He traveled alone to places he'd always wanted to see. He built friendships with men who shared his values and interests. Most importantly, he learned to enjoy his own company. He learned that solitude wasn't loneliness. It was freedom. He learned that he could be completely content on a Friday night with just a good book and a glass of wine. He learned that his happiness didn't depend on someone else's presence in his life. When James finally started dating again, something fundamental had changed. He was no longer approaching relationships from a place of need or desperation. He wasn't looking for someone to complete him because he had learned to be complete on his own. The first woman he dated seriously, Maria, told her sister, "There's something different about him. I feel like he genuinely wants me in his life, but he doesn't need me to survive. It makes me want to earn my place there." This is the paradox of attraction that Jung understood intuitively. The less you need someone's approval, the more they tend to respect you. The more willing you are to lose them, the less likely you are to lose them. The more complete you are alone, the more attractive you become to others. But here's what's absolutely crucial to understand. This isn't a manipulation tactic. This isn't about playing hard to get or being artificially distant. This isn't about withholding affection to create scarcity. This is about genuine self-possession. This is about building a life so rich, so fulfilling, so aligned with your deepest values that another person's presence becomes a beautiful addition rather than a desperate necessity. Jung wrote extensively about the process of integrating the shadow, accepting and incorporating the parts of yourself you've rejected, denied, or hidden to be more socially acceptable. For most modern men, the shadow includes their capacity to say no, to disappoint others, to put their own needs first sometimes, to be willing to walk away from situations that don't serve them. But when you integrate these shadow aspects consciously and deliberately, you don't become cruel or selfish. You become authentic. You become a man with depth, complexity, and mystery. You become someone worth pursuing rather than someone who does all the pursuing. What parts of yourself did you edit out or tone down to be more acceptable in past relationships? What would you do with your time and energy if you weren't constantly trying to earn someone's love and approval? Who were you before you learned to be afraid of being alone? What dreams or goals have you put on hold to accommodate someone else's needs or preferences? The answers to these questions will show you the path back to yourself. And that path back to yourself is also the path to the kind of love that doesn't require you to disappear. You don't need to walk away to hurt her. You need to be the man who can, and chooses to stay only in truth, only in authenticity, only when the relationship honors both of your highest selves. This brings us to Jung's final archetype for the mature, masculine, what I call the sovereign. The sovereign doesn't need power over others because he possesses something infinitely more valuable: complete power over himself. He doesn't need to control external circumstances because he has mastered his internal responses. He doesn't need constant validation from others because he has learned the art of self-validation. The sovereign man loves from fullness, not emptiness. He commits from choice, not desperation. He stays in relationships because they align with his values and enhance his life, not because he's afraid to be alone or doesn't think he deserves better. Jung's most challenging and transformative quote applies directly here. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Completely means accepting your need for solitude as much as your need for connection. Accepting your right to disagree as much as your desire to please. Accepting that you can love someone deeply and still be willing to lose them if staying means losing yourself. When you truly accept yourself completely, with all your flaws, needs, opinions, and boundaries, something magical happens in your relationships. You stop being afraid of other people's reactions because you know that their reactions are about them, not about your fundamental worth as a person. Here's what changes when you become the sovereign man. You stop being afraid of her moods because you understand they're her responsibility to manage, not yours to fix. You can be compassionate without being consumed. You can offer support without taking on the burden of being her emotional regulator. You stop being threatened by her independence, her success, or her other relationships because you have your own rich, fulfilling life. You celebrate her victories because they don't diminish you. You support her growth because you're not afraid she'll outgrow you. You stop needing her constant reassurance and validation because you've developed the ability to validate yourself. You know your worth isn't determined by her mood, her attention, or her decision to stay or go. You start making decisions based on your values rather than her reactions. You start speaking your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. You start maintaining your boundaries, even when it causes temporary conflict. And paradoxically, this is when you become truly irresistible to the right woman. Not because you're playing games or using psychological tricks, but because you're finally playing for keeps. Keeping yourself intact while loving another person fully. The woman who is meant for your life will recognize the sovereign immediately. She'll feel the deep safety of being with a man who won't lose himself in her storms or disappear into her emotions. She'll feel the excitement of being with someone she cannot completely predict, control, or take for granted. She'll feel the profound peace that comes from being able to surrender to someone who is strong enough to handle her surrender without being overwhelmed by it. But here's the beautiful paradox. When you become this man, when you truly embody sovereignty, you also become incredibly selective. You stop being willing to accept relationships that require you to be less than who you are. You stop settling for connections that drain your energy rather than enhance it. You start attracting people who appreciate your authenticity rather than trying to change it. This is what Jung meant by individuation, becoming who you truly are, separate from others' expectations or needs. It's not about becoming isolated or self-absorbed. It's about becoming so solid in your own identity that you can engage with others from a place of choice rather than need. Tonight, before you sleep, Spend 10 minutes in complete silence asking yourself Jung's essential question. Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when no one needs me to be anything specific? What do I actually want, think, feel, and believe when I'm not performing for anyone? The answer to that question, the real, unedited, uncensored answer, that's the man she will respect. That's the man who can walk away. That's the man who chooses to stay not from fear or desperation, but from genuine desire and conscious choice. The journey to becoming this man isn't easy. It requires you to face the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, the fears you've been running from, the truths you've been denying. It requires you to feel the discomfort of disappointing others sometimes, of not being everything to everyone, of being human rather than perfect. It requires you to build a life that doesn't collapse when someone leaves it. It requires you to develop interests, friendships, goals, and dreams that exist independently of romantic validation. It requires you to learn the difference between being alone and being lonely. But on the other side of that journey is something most men never experience: the profound peace of being loved for who you actually are, not who you pretend to be. The deep satisfaction of attracting someone through your authenticity rather than your performance. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can survive and thrive regardless of what happens in your relationships. That's Cruz, the man she respects. That's the man she remembers long after he's gone. That's the man who understands that real love isn't about holding on so tight that you lose yourself. It's about standing so solid in your own truth that others want to orbit around your authentic strength. Remember this: you are not here to be everything to one person. You are here to be yourself to everyone, and let the right people recognize and appreciate that authenticity. The woman who can't love you for who you really are isn't your woman. The relationship that requires you to disappear isn't your relationship. If these words have found you at exactly the right moment, if they've awakened something in you that you thought was lost forever, I want you to do something important. Share this message, not for my sake, but for the men in your life who are still trying to buy love with their authenticity, still trading their souls for temporary approval, still believing that being agreeable is the same as being lovable. The world desperately needs more men who remember how to be both strong and tender, independent and loving, capable of walking away and choosing to stay. Because the greatest gift you can give someone you love is not your neediness or your dependency. It's your conscious choice, and choice only exists when you have the strength, the self-respect, and the inner resources to walk away. Because the greatest gift you can give someone you love is not your dependence, it's your choice. Until next time, the choice only exists when you have the strength to walk away.